to that in just a moment. So in 2008, I actually was not in Colorado. I was though working in the nonprofit sector at an organization that was very similar to Community Resource Center. We did not serve the entire state like CRC does, but I focused my work on really building the capacity in 3 counties in California. And because of the Great Recession, and what life was like in California, my family and I moved to Colorado and came here in 2010 during the height of the Great Recession, where I was really fortunate enough to work at the Community Resource Center as the director of programs. And in the first week on the job, I was really fortunate to get to meet our partners at the Nonprofit Association, who at the time were just right across the street from us. And the association and CRC had for over the past year been working on a project called Weathering the Storm, which was a multi-pronged collaborative project that took several years to complete, that really focused on understanding the challenges that nonprofits faced across Colorado during that time, the impact of the Great Recession on that time. And so going back and looking through the work of that collaborative project and reflecting on how the recession really affected and impacted our sector, I certainly sure you all remember that we saw significant reduction in government funding. We saw significant declines in contributed revenue. The philanthropic community, specifically foundations, on the average lost about 40% of their asset base, which then resulted in a significant decrease in giving in the following years. We saw nonprofits across the United States and in Colorado significantly see a reduction in their revenue streams and a significant increase in the need. So we were once again faced with a situation very similar to the early 2000s, where we were, in serving our communities, we were seeing greater need and less resources in meeting those needs. The Weathering the Storm project was an opportunity for both the association and the Community Resource Center to look at collaborating together, leveraging different resources to really offer skills, knowledge, training across the state in how to overcome these challenging time periods. We did a survey right in 2008 and followed up with something about 2 years later. We created a couple different toolkits that, quite frankly, I dusted off a couple weeks ago and reviewed again because of very pertinent information about financial stability, about diverse revenue, about really nonprofit best practices and how to apply those during these challenging times of the Great Recession. And so while certainly that time period was challenging for our sector, I think it was more challenging for the individuals and the communities that we were serving at that time. And so to be able to proactively and strategically collaborate in a way that was helping our sector, I think was something that both the association and Community Resource Center felt was very much aligned with our mission, but it was also, I think, a testament to not only the resiliency of our sector, but the ability to collaborate and advance important work across the state. And so before we turn it over to looking at how what similarities and differences we have in looking at our current challenges, thought I would see where folks were in 2008 during the Great Recession. So let's see what we have here in the chat. And I'm not sure if Amber or Nick, if you want to kind of help share what.
Definitely. Oh yeah, for sure. I would love to. Yeah.
Right.
Let's go through from the very beginning here. Yeah, working at a nonprofit, Larimer County Boys and Girls Club, working development at the Gathering Place in Denver. Just finishing grad school, a couple of school mentions here. More nonprofit sector work. Seems to be a lot of that. High school, college again. Executive director at Youth Arts Organization, Colorado Springs. So it seems to be a variety of nonprofit and schooling as well.
Great. Thank you. And I think for those of you who have been in our sector and leading nonprofits, I think it is helpful to have been through some challenging times before as we face new challenges. I know that I have leaned into my experiences and certainly that has been helpful in advancing new strategies and new thinking and quite frankly, reducing anxiety as we move forward. So thinking about the similarities and differences of our current challenges to 2008, again, I'd love for folks to add to the chat function again. We'll talk through similarities and differences, but if you could add what you think are some of the most significant differences into that chat function, then we'll highlight those answers shortly. So clearly some of the similarities are that we are facing another economic challenge, not just in our urban area, but across the state in our rural areas as well. Nonprofits are being asked to do more, certainly with less. So that is certainly a similarity. I also was looking through some really interesting information, a survey that you may have participated that Philanthropy Colorado put out just at the early end of March as we were starting to move to our remote work and safe at home guidelines. And what this survey articulated, I found very similar to the challenges that we faced in 2008. So the council, let's see, cutting of funding, donations are down, loss of volunteers. These are things that certainly were similar to 2008. What the survey also articulated that I think is really important as we look at lessons learned is that currently 82% of nonprofits, of organizations are being impacted by COVID-19. 89% anticipate being impacted by the challenges of both the health crisis and the economic crisis upon us. So those are some similarities, a couple differences. Let's see if we can go into the chat and hear from your perspective what some of the differences are as well.
The speed of economic impact, loss of jobs, it's not just an economic crisis, but a public health crisis as well. This one was not anticipated as much or can be linked to any bubbles in order to hold anyone accountable for financial mishandling. Major difference is how fast this happened. The speed, again, referenced. So it also requires nonprofits to navigate social distancing guidelines, including providing PPE for volunteers and employees and loss for space for fundraising events. Newer in my career, and the not being able to hold live events, constantly moving goalposts this time around, massive unemployment, and to all social and economic norms.
Thank you for those of you who added that information to the chat. That's very true. While we certainly have similarities in the economic impact, this whole added health pandemic, global pandemic that is requiring us to work remotely, to not gather socially, is a significant difference and added challenge that we need to face head on as we start to think about how do we go from being responsive into recovery mode, and then eventually into this resiliency mode that is really important for our sector. So thank you to all of you for adding that information. I really appreciate that. So one of the observations of lessons learned that I think is important to highlight is the importance of collaboration. When resources are stretched and impact is key, and leveraging resources to increase that impact, collaboration starts to look as a really important strategy. We are being asked to do more with less, and so finding partners who can help increase that impact is really critical during this time period. I know that my experience in the role that I have at Community Resource Center takes me to all parts of our state, and I feel really lucky to be able to work with small and large nonprofits across the state. And one of the observations that I've made over the years, and that many of you have probably made as well, is that many times in our smaller, more rural parts of our state, collaboration is a way of life. People don't actually get things done without collaborating. And I think there is a lesson to be learned there. I think there's also, it's interesting to see the types of collaborations that happen in our rural communities. Again, because it is really part of the culture of those communities. In order to advance anything, there needs to be collaboration, not just amongst nonprofit organizations, but nonprofits and government and business and community individuals who have an interest in advancing community initiatives. And bringing all of those different perspectives together, I think creates that win-win. It's also worth noting that collaboration takes longer. When you have one organization that can drive a project forward, there's a system in place, there's communication norms, there's the opportunity to internally create process that might mimic or mirror similar types of programs that are already in place. When you bring new folks together, a new team, they may share a vision of an outcome, but there are many ways that, many roads to that same outcome. And so making sure that as you are approaching collaborative opportunities, that you're thinking through how that time commitment is going to look differently. And collaboration requires that commitment to that planning, that communication on the front end, so that you can actually increase that impact. And so I have a couple just tips from one of my favorite nonprofit gurus out there, Andy Robinson, who definitely highlights collaboration as a strategy that we can continually work on, but really collaboration becomes so much more important in times of crisis, because we together actually have more impact than we do singularly. And so just a few of his tips that I think are really relevant for this conversation, and in terms of lessons learned in advancing a collaborative strategy, is number one, really understand your value proposition, your value to a collaborative process. What is it that you bring as an organization that no one else brings? Understanding that helps you better identify partners that can fill different gaps. The second recommendation by Andy around collaboration is to make a strategic decision about when to lead and when to let others lead. And so in our sector, I think that we're lucky to have many leaders, and based on what you believe your value as an organization is, your impact, it might be perfectly appropriate for you as an organization to take a lead in a collaborative project, to take that step up, that step forward and say, you know, I can help move and advance this opportunity. And it also might be equally as strategic to step back and let someone else who might have a different type of value proposition and different asset to leverage to take that leadership role. I do believe in a collaborative process. You do need lots of leaders, but ultimately you do need to decide, who is in fact advancing this initiative. The third piece that Andy Robinson recommends around collaboration is to really understand and know your options. And so this was something that the association and CRC really worked to develop through several toolkits, is understanding that collaboration is a continuum. It's not a one and done. There are lots of ways to collaborate. And so it can be everything from coordinating. Maybe you're coordinating information. Maybe you're sharing resources. Maybe you're communicating around an impact that needs to be made and making sure that that communication is shared collectively through multiple organizations. That would be something that is on the continuum, easier to do than maybe the next step up, which might look more like coordination or collaboration of staff. Maybe you use shared staff to advance a project. Maybe you use shared back office support to help the infrastructure of an organization. I can think of many things that we have worked on together with the Nonprofit Association and Community Resource Center. I see our partner Amy Switek from Philanthropy Colorado. We all have worked on for the last several years the C3 Forum. So it's a great example of multiple staff coming together to advance a larger initiative. And I think that one of the great assets of that collaborative effort is that, again, our three organizations have the ability to reach more people and have a greater impact because the three of us as organizations are coming together to collaborate and create that greater impact. The final piece that I will mention is, again, a tip around collaboration is seeking out potential partners. So this is particularly an important time that we start to think about who potential partners are. And of course, we have our partners, but it's a great time to start thinking about new partnerships. And again, how do we, as nonprofit organizations advancing our mission, how do we actually do that in partnership with others? How do we find those partners? Who are those interesting and different partners? And then how do we start to come together around that shared vision? So much easier said than done. I know that you could probably take a whole 3-day course on collaboration. So I've tried to sum it up as quickly as possible, but definitely would encourage you to think about collaboration as a strategy to get us through COVID-19. And it certainly proved to be a strategy for many nonprofits in our sector and in our state in getting through the Great Recession. So I think what I would love to do is encourage you all to add a collaborative project that you are proud of, that you are advancing maybe in this year, so that we can highlight that in our discussion. So if you could go ahead and add that to the chat, that would be fantastic. All right, so while you're adding that information to the chat, I wanted to make a couple other observations around lessons learned from certainly 2008. And that is, I think one that is really critical is looking at the financial sustainability of our organizations as a whole. And so a significant portion of the work that we did together in weathering the storm was really articulating the importance of that diversity of revenue and what are the tools and the skills and the resources needed to advance that. And so one of the takeaways of the recession, the data takeaways, this is coming from the Urban Institute, which is a great resource for all things nonprofit data, is that many nonprofits that had resources already were in a somewhat financially stable place, were in a position to actually generate more revenue, and during the recession, they were able to continue to receive dollars and diversify those dollars if they already had them. So larger nonprofits were able to continue to receive funding, whereas we saw a disproportionate amount of smaller nonprofits, so nonprofits that generated $50,000 or less, were more likely to either close down or to actually lose a significant amount of that revenue that they were generating. And so what that tells us and shows is that smaller nonprofits that need more are actually the ones that have a harder time accessing resources. And if you think about the state of Colorado, especially our rural areas, we do know that many rural areas have small nonprofits that are meeting great needs. And so if these smaller nonprofits are being affected more because they have less, that seems to be a cycle that we need to break, quite frankly, especially in our rural communities that while they serve less people, they have such great need. And so the lesson learned, I think, pretty strongly out of the Great Recession was that as nonprofit organizations, it is critical for us to be thinking about that diversification. So if we are an organization that relies on grants, grants are great, but let's make sure that you have multiple grants, and let's make sure that you are having conversations with your funders about the grant cycles. Some funders will not fund you every year. Some will. Some want to take a break. So thinking strategically about grant funding is critical. It's not easy to write a grant. I'm thrilled that many of the foundations who are looking at responsive funding to COVID-19 are making strong attempts to make their grant applications easier. That's fantastic. And it's still time to put together an application. And so thinking through how do we diversify within our grant portfolio is critical. Of course, it's not just about grants. We need, as nonprofit organizations, to think about our individual donors. More than 80% of all funding for nonprofits comes from individuals. So if you're thinking about your fund development strategies, are you putting forth energy and resources towards those individual donors? Are you identifying them? Are you cultivating them? If you have them, are you ensuring that you are stewarding them forward so that they will continue to be donors to your organization? Other lessons learned around that diversification of funding is that earned income is a great, usually unrestricted revenue source to help nonprofits, again, pay for those things that restricted funding might not pay for. So that might come in the form of fees, fees for training, fees for participation, conference fees, event fees. And I think that certainly we saw over the last 10 years, nonprofits start to become really savvy in how they structure an earned revenue opportunity. Of course, we are looking at different times with a different landscape and scenario. So it is important to be mindful that we might actually see reductions in earned fees across the board in this time period. We have a significant amount of people who are unemployed who still need resources. And so certainly for organizations like CRC, we're trying to balance that earned income need, but also the importance of our mission in serving the community and making sure that information on nonprofit best practices is available and out there. So something certainly worth talking about in your own organization. And then finally, there are definitely other diversification strategies. Many nonprofits, and again, we see this being significant in our rural communities, have created social enterprises to help offset the costs and increase their revenue and still meet their mission. We see it more again in rural Colorado because it is often part of the collaborative strategy, and it is part of what makes that community work. It may be less of an opportunity in the Denver metro area unless we're seeking out that social enterprise and looking for ways to really align both mission and the ability to generate revenue. So it's a strategy. It's not an easy one. None of these are easy ones. But I think overarching, the importance of that diversification is key. So I'm going to stop there and pause to see kind of what some of those interesting collaborations that you all are working on.
Maria.
Yes.
This is Amber. There was a question that I wanted to, is it a good time to ask you a question that came from chat? One of the questions is, how do we focus on collaboration when so many resources and capacity need to be focused on direct services and our neighbors right now, when collaboration is essential, but it also takes a lot of capacity, as you had mentioned. So do you have, like, through your own experience, do you have any tips about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that I certainly was thinking about as I was putting together kind of this whole lessons learned is, wow, I'm going to ask people to do things and they're not going to have time for this. And I think it's a valid question. I also think that in order for our organizations to serve long time, we have to start thinking differently. So yes, I completely hear and understand that if our focus is on those folks that need our services so much, how do we take a pause to focus on collaboration? And I think that it's important to think about the long game here. So if we don't focus on collaboration, then what is the outcome of that? How will we as an organization be able to continue to meet the need? Will we exhaust ourselves? Will we exhaust our resources? And so it does take more time, but the impact is so much larger that it is worth the time on the front end to make that space for those conversations, so that as an organization, we're still here in a year, in 2 years, in 10 years. And I know that feels really hard when we're in the thick of it. And I think it's more important, excuse me, more important now than it is ever to really start to create that space to have those conversations, because otherwise we are risking the long-term health and potentially ability to address community need over the long term. It's the best answer that I can come up with.
So a couple of the other comments in terms of interesting collaborations. For our annual superhero run in late September, we partnered with a local nonprofit daycare. They host a children's carnival and pumpkin patch immediately following our race. This partnership has made the whole day more fun and has increased participation in both of our events. And
love that, yeah.
In April, our MMFI partnered with a national organization that had money to get to families in need but didn't have clients in Colorado. We were able to get direct money support to families in need quickly.
Good job. Those are great examples. And I love the example of the superhero run because I don't think that's an example of a cross-sector collaboration that you might not think about if you're sitting, in your office. It's like, who can I collaborate with? To think of really outside of the box, and how is it that you are able to work with partners that bring a different value add. Sounds like it's been successful. So good job, Christy. All right. Thanks for the question, Amber. So I have just a couple more lessons learned that I wanted to share. The third is around advocacy. And so I think that my observation around our sector and the role of advocacy, and how advocacy as a strategy can actually advance our mission, is something that I have seen play out not really since 2008, but really since the mid-90s, as the importance of aligning not only mission, but with public policy, and seeing where the disconnect can be. We have some national organizations. We, of course, have the association, who's really advocating on our behalf. But I feel like the sense of what it means to advocate on behalf of our mission has really shifted and changed for the better. We as nonprofit organizations are all advocates of something. And I know, Rennie, I think you like to talk about, I've heard you speak about, we are advocates in our daily life. When we say that we like a certain restaurant or like to visit a certain part of the state, we're advocating. And so I have seen certainly, and I've seen this both internally with our organization at Community Resource Center and with many of our partners that we worked with across the state, a better understanding of the opportunity to advocate on behalf of those that we serve. In a way that is much more powerful of late, that is helping make change and move systems that have really been set up not to be helpful for those that we serve. I'm really excited about the national landscape that we see right now, where more folks are engaged in understanding who the nonprofit sector is, and what it is that we do. And certainly the legislation that we've seen passed over the past few months, it's exciting to see nonprofits be included not only in the language, but also as a powerhouse in helping to move this legislation forward. I know that we as an organization really do rely on the association as our advocacy partner, and helping us understand the landscape, what we, where we have the flexibility to lean in. And probably one of the most important functionalities that I have found is just understanding some of the language, whether it's policy or bills being put forward, can get really complicated. And I so appreciate the ability to kind of distill that information, the association's ability to distill that information down to something that I can understand and spread to our partners across the state. So I think that's an observation. Rennie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but as the leader of the association, and certainly in helping us advance advocacy, I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks for all the thoughts that you've shared so far about changes and opportunities and the differences. I think on the advocacy, I think it's one where collaboration, particularly at the national level among national charities, has helped to coordinate a single message and a unified message and focus that and be able to distribute that and gather large networks to contact their own elected officials. And so I think that is a model that the association tries to also do in Colorado when it comes to state legislative issues. So I think it does require all of us to come together to focus on particular things and try to prioritize, which we can do around things like charitable giving or broad-based government relief. I think each individual sector should continue to do the work that it does for advocating for housing and families and just the myriad of other kinds of things that we do, children, education. So all those things are very important and need to continue, but there is a certain amount of we need to focus together. And in general, in the elected world, that if voices are not heard, they're just not counted. So it's important to do that, even though that may not feel the most comfortable thing for us. It's really an important time, particularly at a time where there's a lot of change. And like now at the state level, it's really going to be difficult for the legislature and how to have a common voice. And I think the last thing I always try to urge and do is to think about how we can be problem solvers. And that's really what we do in our day-to-day work. So coming at problems that can be solved through policy as a problem solver is really helpful. And that's what legislators and policymakers look for.
Well, thank you, Rennie. We really do appreciate your organization and you being a champion of advocacy and building the advocacy capacity within our sector for the very reasons that you stated. So, and one of the highlights I think that's really important around advocacy is understanding the landscape of our sector. And so in the spirit of collaboration, there were many organizations that came together to create the Colorado Nonprofit Economic Impact Report. And I have found that this is a great tool to help level set folks on understanding the nonprofit sector as a whole. There is a lot of misunderstanding of our sector. And so I would encourage folks to look at this tool, this document, this report as full of information that can actually help advance your work with some of those other partners that may not know the scope of the sector. I will just highlight one thing out of the report that I always like to share with people, and that is that Colorado's nonprofit sector employs more than the agriculture, mining, and information industries combined. So it's a $40 billion economic impact. And when you start to talk about our sector in this way, it really, I think, helps people better understand our ability to make change, impact small and large communities. And we know that it will be our sector who is really helping move all of us through not only the response, but the recovery and the building back up and resiliency of our sector. So I think those numbers are really important as we advocate not only for ourselves, but for policy changes as well. All right, so I just have two kind of last pieces of information that I wanted to share with you around lessons learned from the Great Recession and how to actually apply those specifically within your response and your recovery as nonprofit organizations and those that you serve. And so I would encourage all of you to think about your volunteers. So again, a partner in certainly building up volunteerism across the state. The association, I know, has a lot of work around service enterprise and training of volunteers, along with our partner at Spark the Change. And given the scenario, given the situation that we are in currently, we have an opportunity to relook at how we utilize volunteers. In the world of service enterprise, which is a great strategy that can be built throughout your organization, using volunteers at all levels of your organization if you do that, you actually increase your impact, just statistically, it's proven, you increase your impact by almost twofold. And so in this new normal that we exist in, how do we utilize volunteers differently? How do we bring them into our organizations when we can't necessarily meet them in person? How do we make them feel engaged? And what kind of work and projects can we have them help us advance? I think this is going to be important now more than ever. We have lots of people that are out of work and want to give back in a way that they can. So that is one suggestion that I have from a lesson learned around volunteerism and really increasing organizations' ability to utilize and engage with volunteers. The second is to be very fluid in your thinking around your budget, your financial sustainability. All of our new normals have changed, or all of our normals have changed to new normals. We're not having in-person trainings anymore. We are meeting via Zoom. I think we're social distancing. We have a health and an economic crisis at hand. We need to think about how our organizations are going to flex and adapt in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months, in the next year. And I encourage you to think about start having those discussions with your staff, with your board members, with your partners. Doesn't mean that first conversation you have to have it all figured out. I am a believer in having multiple conversations and really good sleep in between those really important conversations. This will help as we start to relook at how we relook at our new normal and the new safer at home guidelines. We don't know how long they were going to last, so we need to start thinking as organizations strategically. And then finally, I think this is very much related. I think it's important to acknowledge that all of these changes have different effects on our people. I'm sure that you have all seen many of your partners, rise to the challenge of how do we pivot and adapt and still meet the need. And it's also important to note that some of your colleagues might be challenged with working from home. I just talked to someone today who said, I don't care if I'm the only one in the office, I can't be at home anymore. And being reasonable and offering resources to help alleviate that anxiety. I was really excited to hear that Energize Colorado, which Rennie has been a part of advancing, is really putting a focus on mental health. So I think that there are some significant resources available out there. It is something that and I will just kind of wrap my comments with a quote that I found. It's actually a Harry Truman quote, which I did not know, but I think it really speaks to the opportunity at hand. And it reads, "A pessimist is one who makes difficulties of his or her opportunities, and an optimist is one who makes opportunities of his or her difficulties." So I'll leave you with that. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Maria. I just wanted to stop for a minute and thank you for sort of taking us back in time. And for some of us, that's probably traumatic, who lived through that in the nonprofit sector. But also there was just so much rich in that time that we can now learn and apply to what's happening now, even though there's obviously many, many differences. So we have about 12 minutes left in our time together. And I just wanted to encourage all of you, especially since we are in a meeting format, anybody who'd like to turn on your video, you're welcome to either put in chat a question or a comment that you'd like to share an observation or an experience that you're able to apply to this time and compared to the time back then. So just this is our time to engage as a group, and that's why we wanted to make sure and set this up in meeting format so that we could be more engaged in the last few minutes together. So please share what you can. And we'll just sit here quietly. Kidding. Hi, Abby.
Hi.
And I was just wondering if you had any, when you turned on your video, I thought maybe you had an experience to share or a question or something you'd like to chime in.
Well, I was gonna avoid being cheeky and say I have no experiences or anything to share. But of course I'm cheeky anyway. But yes, please, I invite everyone to turn on their video. Thank you, Amber, for the opportunity to invite us to turn on our video. It's really hard to connect with people when we can't see them. And so I really want to acknowledge Maria, thank you. Rennie, thank you. And even though I'm part of the association team, this has been a new experience too. And I will just say, I commented in the chat, 2008 was 12 freaking years ago, people. Like, that seems crazy. I mean, we think about, like, didn't even have the Jetson technology to interact with each other over Zoom or WebEx or Google Hangouts. And so much has changed a lot. And so I have so many things running through my mind around collaboration, around how we're engaging from a higher standpoint around policy and what we can do. And I just, I'm really curious, like, what are some things you were doing that are really like right now, this is what I'm doing for my team or for my organization, because everything seems so big, and then we're either like really big or we're really tactical. And so as your colleague and friend, and I'd love to know, like, what are some tips that you might have that would help ground us a little bit in this time of navigating the big and the like granular needing to get stuff done. Did I totally put you on the spot, or was I supposed to share something? I don't know.
Try.
I'm happy to share something too. I just felt like you shared so much over the last, like, you know, since 2008 till now, that I just want to glean a little bit more for my own growth.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it relates to the question that was asked earlier about, like, how do you collaborate when we're like in a crisis? And I think that is such a challenge. And I just go back to, if I go back to the long game, if we don't play the long game, we're not going to be here. And so if collaboration is a strategy that is more impactful, and creates more value for those that we serve, then creating that space is really critical. And as someone who doesn't work in direct service, and I have worked in direct service before, I do think there's a different kind of exhaustion that happens than in the world that I work in right now. And so, again, easier said than done, but I think it's really important to create that space within your day. I think people will run out of energy and steam if they're just constantly reacting. If you can pause, and it might not feel good in that moment, and start to really think about the future, I think you'll get there. But it does require that pause and thoughtfulness around strategy. And I think it's important for the mental health of ourselves, quite frankly. Like, if we can't think past 3 months, like, how anxious, that's very anxious and anxiety ridden. I think our teams need to know what's going to happen in a year, even if it's not good news, or even if the scenario is, you know, we might lose funding in this program. let's just talk about it. Let's get it out in the open and let's be transparent. That's what I would offer. But I'm sure other folks have lots of other suggestions.
Maria, also, someone on the chat asked if they can get your notes and outlines. So I don't know if there's a way you might be able to share with Nick so that our follow-up email to everyone who registered today, we could send some kind of summary of some of the things you talked about, because this person, Bree, would like to talk through this and with some of their members on their team who couldn't make it to the presentation. Thank you. Carmen Hub says another collaboration idea is to consider mergers right now, which is certainly, we actually have a session coming up on that at the end of the month where we'll talk about how you make those considerations, if it's wise, and then sort of the first steps to exploration. And Rennie and Abby will be talking about that.
That's a good combo to talk about that. I like that. Definitely a good strategy.
We have like maybe like a smidge of experience.
Absolutely.
And Maria, I appreciate so much thank you for answering my question, which was a little all over the place. Sometimes 4 and 5 o'clock Zoom meetings get a little meh, meh, meh. So I
did answer it.
No, I appreciate that, and I think that everything you're saying is so salient to where we are right now. So
yeah, I guess taking care of ourselves, right? Got to take care of ourselves.
Hi, Paula.
Hi, Amber. You know, I think one approach, it's more from a business perspective, but if you've got an idea for collaboration, it's how we all deal with high-end stress and being hammered daily with something new and different. But if you can offer and approach another nonprofit and say, I really need this, you know, and allow them not to have to be creative and think up things right now, if that's not their method of handling stress, to say what we need from a particular organization and begin to create the dialogue so they're not working as hard. You've done some of the footwork to help them begin to enter into those conversations, possibly?
That makes tons of sense. That is a really smart way to kind of approach that collaborative conversation to make it easier on the person that you're trying to partner with to say, okay, no problem.
Paula, just the last part of what you said, I had a hard time hearing. So did you ask a question at the end, or were you had you made a statement?
I think it's just a way that those of us who haven't had the opportunity to work as part of a team in a nonprofit, beyond board work, kind of approach some of the things that we do. When you need something or you think you'd like to at least explore possibilities of collaboration, just be a bit brave and go ask. And that takes the onus, I think, off of another organization to say, oh, I don't have time to think about that, but I do like that idea. And yes, we could do that or might benefit. It's, you know, people, I think, are just almost like deer in the headlights right now. And it's hard to be creative or think out of your norms when you don't even know what the norms are going to be. And they certainly don't reflect what they were a few months ago. So it's kind of just saying, from an organization's perspective, I need something. I think you could help me with this. Would you entertain that conversation?
I just want to really appreciate you saying that, especially, I mean, I don't know, obviously you weren't necessarily specifically speaking from like an end perspective, but because you're working with so many businesses right now, and nonprofits. I'm sure this is coming to you a lot, and it's really helpful when people even come to Ent and say, how can you help me and how can we be creative together to get through this? I really appreciate you sharing your perspective.
I think that's absolutely true. And it's hard to stop and allow your mind to stretch a little bit and figure out what do you need. But if you can at least put that out, it does enhance, I think, the ability to start dialogue, even if you don't have total resolution at an immediate level. But it does just create some new ways of looking at things, and maybe fill some holes that you have in your organization, and you could fill holes for another to try to capture what that opportunity might look like.
Thank you so much. Maria, we are at 5 o'clock. I didn't know you wrapped your conversation so beautifully with your quote. But was there any final things that you'd like to say before we close our session?
No, thank you. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you all in the office at some point and working together. Thank you.
Rennie?
Maria, thank you, Amber. Maria, I just want to say thank you very much for thoughtfully and sharing your expertise in a way that does apply to the world which we live today, even though it's quite different because of the health concerns and the new ways that we have to do business. But I think it's important to know that there are a lot of building blocks that nonprofits use all the time, and we start from those and move on to do new things that we can as we go. And we really appreciate your expertise and everything you've done throughout Colorado and Community Resource Center does every day to strengthen nonprofits, and look forward to future collaborations. And thanks to Amber and Nick for organizing today and the Assembly Colorado series. And we hope that all of you will continue to be with us as we do this every Wednesday through May.
Thank you, Rennie. Thank you, Maria. We will get this video up on YouTube and share it with everyone who's registered today, and we'll also share it publicly on social, and Community Resource Center will also share it. And please join us next week as we bring together some funders who are going to share their perspective of how they're working with communities in creative ways and what the needs are and sort of how we're looking towards the future. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your week, and hopefully we'll see you next Wednesday.